My son-in-law handed me a cardboard box and told me I had until Friday to clear out my workshop. Not my things from the spare bedroom, not the stuff in the hall closet. My workshop, the one I built with my own hands 41 years ago in the back corner of the property I've owned since before he was born. We're converting it, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Studio space, for Kelsey. My daughter stood behind him in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the refrigerator. I'm 63 years old. I spent 38 of those years as a licensed electrician in Boise, Idaho. I wired half the commercial buildings downtown. I raised my daughter alone after her mother passed. I never asked either of them for a single thing. This is my house, I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. My son-in-law, I'll call him that because I can't bring myself to use his name right now, straightened up and put his hands in his pockets. He has a habit of doing that when he's about to say something he's already decided. We've talked about this, Norm. You're not getting any younger. The upkeep alone. I maintain this property myself. The point is, he said, Kelsey and I need more space, and honestly, with the market the way it is, it makes more sense for you to be somewhere smaller, more manageable. I looked at my daughter. She finally looked back at me. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't say anything. She just gave me this small, careful nod, like she was apologizing in a language she'd decided was easier than words. That nod broke something in me that I'm not sure ever fully healed. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and whether you've ever had a moment where someone you loved more than anything looked away when you needed them most. Hit subscribe, because what happened next I could never have seen coming. I built that house in 1983. I was 22 years old, working double shifts, and spending my weekends mixing concrete and learning from my uncle how to frame a wall properly. The property was 3/4 of an acre on the east side of Boise, back when that part of town was still mostly fields and chain-link fences. I paid cash for the lot. It took me 4 years to finish the house. Every outlet, every fixture, every inch of copper wire. I put it in myself. My wife Claudette moved in when the drywall was barely dry. She used to joke that she smelled paint for the first 6 months of our marriage. She didn't mind. She had a way of making any room feel like it had always been a home. We had our daughter when I was 27. We called her our late surprise. Claudette passed when our girl was 11. A brain aneurysm on a Tuesday morning. The kind that doesn't give you any warning and doesn't give you any time. One day she was standing at the counter making school lunches, and the next day she was gone. I raised my daughter in that house. I drove her to school and sat in the bleachers at every swim meet and helped her with geometry at the kitchen table. I wasn't perfect. I worked too much. I didn't always say the right things. But I was there, every single day, in the house I built. When she married, I was happy for her. I thought her husband was a decent man. A little slick, maybe. He sold commercial real estate and had the kind of confidence that fills a room before he does. But he made her laugh, and that counted for something. They moved in with me 2 years ago. Temporarily, they said. Just while the market settled, they'd be in their own place within the year. 2 years later, he was handing me a cardboard box and talking about studio space. I took the box. I didn't say anything else. I went out to my workshop, sat down on the stool I've had since 1991, and stared at the wall of tools I'd accumulated over 4 decades. A man's tools are his autobiography, my uncle used to say. I sat there for a long time. Then I remembered the letter. Claudette had pressed it into my hand the morning before she died. I know that sounds almost too neat, too arranged, like something from a movie. But I've thought about it 1,000 times, and I think she knew. Not that she was going to die, exactly, but that something felt wrong. She'd had headaches for 2 weeks that she hadn't told me about. She was that way. She didn't want to worry people. She'd written it on plain white stationery, folded 3 times, and sealed it with a piece of Scotch tape. She handed it to me while I was getting my keys off the hook by the door. "Don't read it now," she said. "Just put it somewhere safe, for when you really need it." I put it in the fireproof lockbox we kept in the workshop, behind the solvent cans on the bottom shelf. And then she was gone, and the grief was so enormous and so sudden that everything else disappeared inside it for a long time. I hadn't opened the box in years. I was afraid of what reading her handwriting would do to me. That night, after my son-in-law had gone to bed, and my daughter had knocked softly on the workshop door, and then gone back, inside when I didn't answer, I opened the lockbox. The letter was exactly where I'd left it. My hand shook a little, getting the tape off. 41 years of wiring buildings, and my hand shook opening a piece of Scotch tape. My love, she'd written. If you're reading this, then something happened and I couldn't explain it in person. I need you to know 3 things. The first is that the house is yours. Completely. I had an attorney draw up a revocable trust 3 months ago. Everything is in your name alone. I should have told you, but you were working so hard, and I kept meaning to, and then I kept not, and now I'm giving you this letter instead. The paperwork is in the gray accordion folder in the storage unit on Fairview. Unit 114. The combination is our anniversary. The second is that I've been saving. The second thing was the one that changed everything. Claudette had been a bookkeeper. She worked part-time for a small accounting firm while I was in the field, and she had a mind for numbers that I never fully appreciated until she wasn't there to use it. She clipped coupons. She bought store brands. She drove our daughter to activities instead of paying for a sitter. I always thought we were just being careful. We were being careful. But she was also doing something else. Starting in 1987, she had opened a brokerage account in both our names that I never knew existed. She funded it from her own income and from the small amounts she saved each month from our household budget. She invested conservatively at first. Municipal bonds, utility stocks, and then in the mid-90s, she started putting money into companies she read about in the financial section of the newspaper. I know you think I'm just reading the business page to look smart, she wrote, but I've been doing homework. There are companies I believe in, boring companies that do essential things. I've been buying them slowly for years. She mentioned the account by name and gave me the login information she'd written down in 1999 when online banking became a thing. She'd updated it every 6 months and tucked the current version into the same envelope. The third thing, she wrote at the end, is just this. If someone ever tries to take your house or your dignity or your sense of what you've earned, fight. You worked too hard. You gave too much. Don't let anyone make you feel small in a life you built yourself. I love you more than you ever quite believed, which was the one thing about you I never fully fixed. Claudette sat in my workshop until 3 in the morning. Then I drove to the storage unit on Fairview. Unit 114, our anniversary, 04-17-82. The gray accordion folder was exactly where she said it would be, standing upright behind a box of Christmas ornaments. It was thick, thicker than I expected. Inside were folders organized by year, each one labeled in her precise handwriting. The revocable trust documents, investment statements going back to 1987, a handwritten ledger tracking every deposit, every purchase, every dividend reinvested, and a more recent statement. She must have updated the folder sometime in the months before she died, showing the current balance of the brokerage account. I read the number 3 times. Then I sat down on the concrete floor of that storage unit and put my face in my hands. Not from sadness. From something I can only describe as the feeling of being caught by someone who loved you enough to plan for your worst moment decades in advance. The account held just over $2 million. I don't know when I started crying. I just know I couldn't stop for a while. Not because of the money, because of her. Because of all those years she sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper. And I'd kiss the top of her head and tell her I was going out to the workshop, and she was building us a future I didn't even know to be grateful for. I drove home as the sky was going gray. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time, looking at the house I built, my house. Legally, completely, unmistakably mine. Then I went inside and made coffee and waited. My son-in-law came downstairs at 7:30 in his gym clothes, surprised to see me at the kitchen table. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Sit down. We need to talk about the house." He sat. My daughter appeared in the doorway a minute later, and I asked her to sit too. She looked nervous. She should have looked nervous. "I want to make sure we all understand the same thing," I said. "This house is mine. It's in a trust in my name. Has been since 1982. I own the property outright and always have." My son-in-law blinked. "I know that, Norm." "Nobody said, 'You handed me a box,'" I said, "and told me to clear out my workshop, a workshop on property I own. I want us to be clear about what that was." He started to say something about how I'd misunderstood, that it was a conversation, not an ultimatum. He said the word misunderstood twice. My daughter was very quiet. "I'm not angry," I said, which wasn't entirely true, "but I've been thinking about what I want. And I've decided I'd like the 2 of you to find your own place. Not because I'm throwing you out. Because I think it's better for everyone to have a clear understanding of what belongs to who." My son-in-law stood up. He had a look on his face I hadn't seen before, something calculating, behind the offense. Fine, he said, if that's how you want it. He went upstairs. My daughter looked at me across the table for a long moment. She still had that look, the wet eyes, the silence. Mom would have done the same thing, I said quietly. She pressed her lips together, nodded once. Then she followed him upstairs. They were gone within 2 weeks. He arranged it faster than I expected, which told me something about how prepared he'd been for the possibility. That might have been the end of it, if he hadn't started talking. I found out from my neighbor, who I've known for 20 years, and who has never been able to hold a secret for longer than 48 hours. She came over with a casserole, her standard approach to anything emotionally complex, and mentioned, carefully, that she'd heard a few things. My son-in-law had been telling people that I'd lost my mind, that I was unstable, that I'd made irrational financial decisions, and might not be capable of managing my own affairs. He'd said it to my daughter's friends. He'd said it to our shared dentist, which is a particular kind of brazen. And, this was the part that made my jaw tighten, he'd made an appointment with an elder law attorney to explore whether there were grounds for a conservatorship. He wanted legal control of my finances, my house, my life. And he was doing it quietly, methodically, while telling everyone who'd listened that he was just trying to protect me. I don't get angry quickly. I was raised to be careful with anger, to treat it like a tool, not a weapon. But sitting at my own kitchen table, eating my neighbor's casserole, and absorbing what she was telling me, I felt something settle in my chest that I can only describe as cold clarity. I called an attorney the next morning. Not an elder law attorney. A civil litigator named Prescott, who'd done work for the union when I was still active, a man who had a reputation for being very difficult to surprise. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. "Do you have documentation of the trust?" he asked. "I have everything. And the financial accounts? All of it." "Okay," he said. "Here's what we're going to do." Prescott moved quietly and quickly. He filed a formal legal notice establishing my competency and full ownership of the property, supported by documentation going back 4 decades. He sent a letter to my son-in-law's attorney, because by this point there was one, outlining the legal consequences of pursuing a conservatorship action against a competent adult with clear documentation of his financial standing and property rights. He also, with my permission, had a brief and rather pointed conversation with the elder law attorney my son-in-law had consulted. That conversation, as Prescott described it to me later, lasted about 12 minutes and ended with the other attorney declining to take the case. I don't know exactly what was said. I didn't ask. What I know is that 3 weeks after my neighbor came over with that casserole, I received a formal notice that no conservatorship action would be pursued. I also received, 2 days later, a text from my daughter. It said, "Dad, I need to talk to you, alone." We met at a diner near the old neighborhood, a place we used to go on Sunday mornings when she was small. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner booth with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. She looked like she hadn't slept well. I ordered coffee and waited. "I didn't know," she said. "About the attorney, about what he was doing." "Okay," I said. "I mean it, Dad." "He told me he was just looking into options. He said it was about making sure you were protected. I didn't know he was actually filing anything." I studied her face. She wasn't lying. My daughter has never been much of a liar, which is something I always counted as a victory. "What happened when you found out?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. We fought, really fought. He said I didn't understand the big picture, that eventually you'd need help and we'd be the ones responsible and it was better to get ahead of it. She paused. I told him if he moved forward with anything without talking to me, I was leaving, and he backed down. She looked at the table. But I don't know if that's the same thing as being wrong. We sat there for a while. The coffee was bad, the way it always was at that diner, and I drank 2 cups anyway. "Your mother trusted me to handle things," I finally said. "She didn't do it for me. She did it so I'd have options. So I wouldn't be cornered." My daughter's eyes filled. "She was so smart I said. "You got that from her. We didn't resolve everything that day. I don't think you can resolve 41 years of accumulated love and 1 very bad month over bad coffee in a corner booth. But we stayed at that table for 2 hours, and when we left, she hugged me for a long time in the parking lot, the way she used to when she was small. It was a start. Over the next several months, I did a lot of thinking about what Claudette's money was for. Not what I could spend it on, what it was for. She hadn't saved it so I could live lavishly. She'd saved it, she wrote, so I'd have options, so I wouldn't be cornered. And I thought about all the people I'd known in my working life, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, the whole skilled trades world, who didn't have that, who worked 30 or 40 years and ended up with a bad back and a small pension and not many options at all. I thought about a guy I worked with for 15 years named Stu, not his real name, but close, who retired 2 years before me and spent the next year trying to figure out what to do with himself. He'd been wiring buildings since he was 19. He didn't know how to be still. He got depressed. His wife worried about him. I called him. What would it have meant, I asked him, if there'd been a place you could go? A shop, a class, somewhere to keep using your hands? He was quiet for a second. Everything, he said. It would have meant everything. I started making calls. It took 14 months. It took 2 attorneys, a zoning variance, a contractor I'd worked with for 20 years, and more paperwork than I'd filed in my entire career. But 14 months after I found Claudette's letter, I stood in front of a low brick building on the east side of Boise, 4 miles from my house, on a street where the coffee shops were just starting to move in, and watched a crew I'd hired hang a sign above the door. The Claudette Meridian Trades Workshop. I'd named it after her maiden name, her family name, the name she'd carried all those years she was quietly building a future I didn't know about. Inside, 12 workstations for basic electrical work, 8 for carpentry, a small classroom, a tool-lending library, a program for retired tradespeople who wanted somewhere to go, something to teach, someone to teach it to. The opening was a Saturday in October. I didn't invite many people. I'm not a ceremony kind of man. But Stu showed up. And so did 6 other guys I'd worked with over the years, all of them retired, all of them a little lost in the way that men get when the work that defined them is suddenly gone. And so did a group of young people from a vocational program across town who needed somewhere to practice. And so did my daughter. She came alone. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the sign, and then she walked over to where I was standing by the tool wall and didn't say anything for a while. She'd have loved this, she finally said. I know, I said. We stood there together, looking at the room. Stu was showing a 22-year-old how to properly strip a wire. Someone had brought coffee. The smell of sawdust and solder was everywhere, which is the smell of my whole life. Dad, my daughter said, I'm sorry for not saying anything sooner, for that nod. I knew which nod she meant. I'd thought about it more than once. You were in a hard spot, I said. That's not an excuse. No, I agreed. It's not. She looked at me. Can we try again? Not pretend it didn't happen. Actually try again. I thought about Claudette, about the letter, about the 38 years I spent, thinking I knew exactly what I had, and the night I found out it was so much more than I'd understood. Your mother would say, I told her, that trying again is the whole point. My daughter put her arm through mine, the way she used to do when she was a teenager and too old to hold my hand. We stood like that for a while, watching people learn things in a room I'd built in her mother's name. I don't tell this story because it's a revenge story. I mean, there's some of that in there. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that felt something sharp and satisfying when Prescott told me the conservatorship action had been dropped. I'm human. I'm a man who was handed a cardboard box in his own house. But that's not what I think about when I think about this year. I think about Claudette sitting at the kitchen table with the newspaper. I think about an accordion folder in a storage unit, organized by year, going back to 1987. I think about a woman who loved me enough to prepare for my worst moment and trusted me enough to find my way through it. I used to think the house was the thing she gave me, the property, the security. But sitting in that workshop, watching people learn something honest from people who'd spent a lifetime learning it, I understood what she actually gave me. She gave me options. She gave me the ability to choose what my life stood for when it mattered most. And she gave me that letter, which she wrote when she was afraid something was wrong, which she sealed with a piece of Scotch tape, which she pressed into my hand on an ordinary Tuesday morning, and told me not to read until I really needed it. I needed it. I think she knew I would. If you're watching this and you're a father or a mother who's ever felt invisible in your own life, I want you to hear this. The people who built things quietly, patiently, with their hands and their discipline and their years. We don't disappear just because someone decides we're inconvenient. The foundation holds. It holds. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of that. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? And what's the thing someone left you that you didn't understand the value of until you really needed it? I think about that question a lot. Sitting in the workshop in the evenings, after everyone's gone home, in the smell of sawdust and solder and coffee, in a room named for a woman who knew exactly what she was doing all along.